Will PIX be affected? What is the White House's view on this type of system that we use so much here in Brazil?
So one of the tools that these designations provide to the United States government is the ability to block any kind of transaction with these criminal groups. Now, the implementation of these designations is the responsibility of the Treasury Department. Now, they will be the ones responsible for conducting analyses and investigations. It's impossible to talk about any specific case, but we know that the purpose and goal of these designations is to break the illicit financial networks that these groups use to fund their operations.
Amanda, it's excellent to have you here with us, That's why we're discussing various aspects so that we can understand what this new rule is that will now apply to our country. This decision itself, you made it very clear that it's a determination by Trump, that he has this goal of eliminating these groups that cause these problems, which have already caused issues in different states in the United States. That is, the decision itself, just to understand a little more, is a prerogative of the State Department because they are the ones who provide it. Look, Trump, here is the data. Now the decision is yours, or is it exclusively Trump's prerogative? Just so we can understand how the process works to reach this decision.
So as part of American law, our law is quite complex, quite broad, and offers several tools to protect our national security. Now, with this government of President Trump, he made it very clear from the very first day that he will use all the tools to fight organized crime in the region and to protect the interests of the United States. So he, working with his team, Secretary Marco Rubio, did all the analysis and the necessary work to reach these designations, which again are very clear in American law. And when the designation was officially published, that's when it comes into effect. Now we are sharing this information to also let people in different countries around the world know about the effort that the United States is making to protect our national security.
In your view, what is behind this decision to classify the organizations, the factions, as terrorist organizations? And if this could cause diplomatic tension regarding the understanding of what terrorism is?
President Trump made it very clear from the beginning of his term that he will use all the tools at our disposal to fight these criminal groups operating in our region and to protect the security of the United States. Now, the designations of PCC and CV are part of a broad strategy that President Trump is working on in the region. These two groups are part of 17 criminal groups designated as foreign terrorist organizations. President Trump is taking action to eliminate these groups.
Jonas Maya is also here with us for the interview.
Amanda, thank you for joining us to clarify this very important issue for Brazil when it comes to public security. And when this designation was announced, there was some doubt and even concern about possible military intervention by the United States here in Brazil in some regions. So, as the spokesperson for the State Department, could you explain in more detail whether that could happen in any situation involving the PCC or Comando Vermelho? Or is this more limited to American soil? Or is there actually a possibility of military intervention, some kind of military action by the United States here in Brazil?
These designations of groups as foreign terrorist organizations are clearly laid out in our law. It does not include any kind of military action. Now, it's important to highlight the consequences of the designations, which are visa restrictions for members of these groups. Also, the freezing of their assets here in the United States. The designations also prohibit people within the United States from conducting any kind of transaction with these groups. And it also classifies as a crime knowingly providing material support to these groups.
Isabel Mega.
Amanda, thank you so much for being with us here at CNN Brazil. My colleague Eli Jonas was talking about the effects on security. I'd like to hear from you what the possible effects on the financial system are. Because ever since the information came out about the designation of the factions as terrorist organizations, we've noticed, along with sources from the Brazilian government, a huge concern about possible effects on our financial system. For example, the most obvious example is PIX. Right? There's a concern that this direct money transfer system, which is widely used by Brazilians, could somehow be affected.
We're still here live with Amanda Robertson, spokesperson for the United States Department of State, talking with us about the practical changes after the designation of some Brazilian factions as terrorist organizations. Theo Curie.
In the cooperation between the United States and Brazil regarding investigations, because these are concerns of investigators who have been working for years in the fight against organized crime, especially regarding the Comando Vermelho and the Primeiro Comando da Capital, that there may be a restriction on the sharing of information by the United States as a result of this designation. I would like to hear from you what the impact is on the cooperative and harmonious relationship the two countries have had for years.
The United States and Brazil have broad cooperation in the area of security. We have more than 9 federal agencies from the United States government cooperating in Brazil with the authorities, and this cooperation will continue. It's important to remember that, as Secretary Marco Rubio said, we share this hemisphere, we share the same challenges. These two groups, the PCC and CV, are not operating only within Brazil. Their activities extend beyond Brazilian borders into other countries. In fact, here in the United States, we already have evidence of their activities in 12 different states. So obviously, cooperation is important and will continue.
Amanda, just to understand this a little better, do you already understand that Brazilian organized crime is also operating in the United States?
Exactly. We have evidence, and we know that these criminal groups like PCC and CV, as well as other large cartels and organizations in the hemisphere, also operate here in the United States. We already have evidence of their activities. And that's why it was a very important priority for President Trump to take this action to protect our national security.
Ellis Jonas?
Amanda, a question to make it very clear for those who are following us. So this classification is much more restricted to the activities of organized crime in the United States than here in Brazil. For example, cutting off this financial connection and activities on American soil. There is no action from the United States here regarding Brazil. Is that correct? And that leads to another question I still have about international cooperation. Because members of the Brazilian Federal Police say that when groups are designated as terrorists by the United States, the information ends up not being shared with the CIA, but rather with the FBI. It would be more practical. Isn't there a difficulty regarding this classification in your assessment?
Of course, we will continue to cooperate with the Brazilian authorities. We understand that collaboration and cooperation are important in order to confront these groups that are affecting both Brazilian and American communities. I want to emphasize that these groups are among the most violent in Brazil and in the region as well. They are responsible for brutal attacks against police officers, authorities, and civilians. So we really also encourage the Brazilian government to take stricter measures to stop the activities of these groups right away.
Yes, excuse me, Isabel Mega?
Amanda, this decision by the United States came right after the visit of the presidential hopeful, who is Senator Flavio Bolsonaro, to the White House. Can we link the decision you announced to this visit, or is it a decision that would have been made by the United States government anyway?
So it's really only President Trump and his team who make decisions of this magnitude for the United States. Yes, President Trump obviously has meetings and conversations with different leaders, political leaders all over the world, but he has a responsibility to the United States. And it's very clear from these designations that he is using all the measures at our disposal to ensure the security of the United States. That is his highest priority.
Amanda, a question came up during our conversation. With investigators, whether from the federal police, the civil police, or the public prosecutor's office of the state of Sao Paulo, who work directly in combating the First Capital Command. Here in the state of Sao Paulo, but also regarding the national and transnational presence of this group, who is it that determines whether someone is or is not connected to a criminal organization? Will this come from a sentence in Brazil or from an assessment in the United States? Brazilian authorities saw this as a legal limbo. I would like you to explain this to us, if possible.
So the United States Department of Justice is responsible for carrying out these investigations and related efforts. So they are the ones who analyze the information and also make these announcements public when they are made. So let's see the work they are going to do now. Also, as I said, the Treasury Department plays an important role in the financial part. So really, these designations allow the different entities that are part of the United States government to do their part to contribute to the elimination of these groups that are threatening American communities.
Jonas?
Amanda, one more question. Regarding these two criminal factions from Brazil, is there any study within the State Department there in the United States to classify other factions from Brazil as well? For example, the Terceiro Comando Puro, which is from Rio de Janeiro, the main rival of the Comando Vermelho, and which uses religious framing in attacks against its adversaries. Is there any study regarding extending this classification to other groups from Brazil, since Brazil has at least 80 Brazilian factions? Why? What is the reason? Let me add to the question, why is the classification only for two groups and not for others as well?
We don't comment on ongoing studies or investigations, but what we do know is that as part of President Trump's vision to protect the interests of the United States, we will continue using all available tools, doing everything possible to secure the United States and to combat these groups that are operating not only within Brazil, but also in the region and also within the United States.
It can't be ruled out that this could be expanded to these other groups in the future. You only said that you can't say whether there is a study about this.
We don't comment on any study that may be underway. If there is any announcement, the United States always makes that information public.
We spoke here with Amanda Robertson, spokesperson for the United States Department of State, and we thank her for kindly coming here to answer our questions in this important interview. Because with a decision of this magnitude, it also comes with many questions. Understanding what the limits are, what the effects are, and some issues discussed here were very important.
So Donald Trump has already been threatening PIX, and I remember that I also mentioned PIX last year, right? But I joked that he probably doesn't know what PIX is, just like Bolsonaro didn't know either, right? When they created PIX, the press itself went there to congratulate him, and he felt a bit awkward because he didn't know. He thought it was something from aviation. He thought it was some aviation rule. In other words, Donald Trump doesn't know either. Donald Trump only found out because Visa and MasterCard went to complain to him, right? Visa and MasterCard felt harmed because PIX is pretty obvious. Being such a fast payment infrastructure and better than debit cards themselves, it was widely adopted by the entire population in Brazil and by small businesses. And simply the debit function, at least as far as I know, wherever I go on the street, nobody talks about debit cards anymore, right? Visa and MasterCard felt wronged and complained. And another big oligarch, billionaire who complained was Mark Zuckerberg himself, because WhatsApp Pay didn't take off in Brazil, also because of PIX, right? Yeah, and then you see Donald Trump start talking about PIX. That was something the billionaires asked him to do, so that he would attack PIX. So I think the big concern, obviously, is that there will be several economic impacts, and it's already happening, right? There was this movement in the stock market because immediately the cost for companies will increase, especially the cost of compliance, right? Because the United States has now given itself the arbitrary right to come in tomorrow and say, hey, Will, your company had sold something or did some business with a company owned by someone we identified here who is connected to the Red Command, to the PCC. So we're going to sanction your company. Your company can no longer sell in the American market. Right? I can make it even tougher and say this. In fact, no American company can sell to your company either. No American company can be a supplier to your company. The United States claims the right to shut down any company at will. But the big problem with the financial system is that the United States, using the same line of argument, identified and said, look, even this guy who's connected to the PCC moved money and he used the PIX platform, right? And then he can even, and he has an account, I don't know, at Itaú. He can, which was actually the concern of the big banks in Brazil with the Magnitsky Act last year, that the United States, in a worst-case scenario, could disconnect the banks from the SWIFT system. He can also take it upon himself and say, look, you'll be disconnected from the SWIFT system unless you stop using PIX in your institution. So the United States is, let's say, it stole the Trump card. To use that game as an example, it stole the Trump card and is holding the Trump card in its hand. So it's going to